Hello everyone, welcome to this live online demonstration of Honeywell's Jade controller for the economizer. Quick note, this video assumes that the Jade controller has been wired per their wiring guide. If it has not been wired yet, go ahead and do that and then come back to this video for review. Okay, for this segment of the video, we're going to be talking about our system setup, advanced setup, and our set points. Let's go ahead and get started. First thing you want to do is scroll down to our system setup. As you can see here, today is October 16th, 2020. I've already set the date. If you wanted to change that, you would just go here, press enter. You can see change stored. This is our degrees Fahrenheit or degrees Celsius. We'll go ahead and keep it as degrees Fahrenheit. This is our equipment. We have three options for this. Our conventional, which is gas or electric heating. Heat pump 0, which is the reversing valve on your heat pump, defaults to heating mode. And heat pump B, which is your heat pump reversing valve defaulting to cooling mode. Go ahead and leave it as conventional. Next up, we have our auxiliary 2. These first two options that I'm going to show you are if you were to choose conventional. First one being shutdown. This is if you had a duct smoke detector, for instance, and it sent a signal to the economizer, it would know to shut down completely. Or your heating. And then the next two options are for your heat pump. And these are the same as what we had discussed in the option above. Okay, fan type. This can be either a 1-speed or a 2-speed, depending on what you have. Fan CFM. This is really only used if you have your DCV Cal enable option. You're basically just saying what the capacity of the fan is. We'll talk about that DCV option a little bit later. Aux1 out. You have either none, an ERV if you had an energy recovery ventilator on your system. If you had a 2-stage exhaust fan, you would choose it here. And your last one is a system. This is basically just a system alarm that would be outputted to a third party, such as a building automation system. Next up, we have our occupancy, either input or always. If it's input, it's receiving an input from a thermostat or your automation system saying that the building is occupied. If you don't have anything like that, you would choose always, which is basically just a virtual jumper telling the system to always assume that the building is occupied. If you wanted, you could add a physical jumper between your occupancy and your R terminals. And the last option for the system setup is to restore everything to factory default. Go ahead and keep that as no. Next, we have our advanced setup. This is your mixed air lockout set point. If the outside air is less than 45 degrees, this is what it's saying. If it's less than 45 degrees, your freeze protection will go on, and you will tell your economizer either to go to closed or minimum position, which is our next option here, our freeze position. See here, closed or minimum position. Your CO2 zero value and your CO2 span kind of go hand in hand. So basically your CO2 zero value is your zero value for your CO2 sensor. So if your CO2 sensor outputs between 500 to 1500 parts per million, your CO2 zero value would be 500 ppm. In terms of your span, that is the difference between your zero value and the max for your CO2 sensor. So same example, it's reading from 500 ppm to 1500 ppm. Your span is going to go ahead and be 1000 ppm. You can see I already changed those here. Stage 3 delay. Okay, so in this scenario, your first stage is your economizer. Your second stage is the first stage of mechanical cooling, which is helping to cool the space. So this option is telling your system how long it needs to wait until it turns on your second stage of mechanical cooling to help cool the space. You could also set it to off if there is no second stage of mechanical cooling. In general, you're not going to be using this option, but it's there if you want it. This is the damper position that you want your economizer to go to if it receives a signal for shutdown. It could be either 0% or 100% open. So we'll stick with closed since that's the default. This is the DCV cal enable that we were talking about. In order for this option to work, it needs your return air, outside air, mixed air, and CO2 sensors, and your fan needs to be single speed, but basically this is setting your DCV automatic control of the dampers, and it resets the ventilation based off of your return air, outside air, and mixed air sensor conditions. The next 6 options are there for you to calibrate sensors that may have fallen out of calibration. For your temperatures, it allows you to adjust it by 2.5 degrees. For your humidity, it allows you to change it by 10%. And then our last option is our 2-speed fan delay. So when the economizer is in economizing mode, this is the delay before the high-speed fan, or for the high-speed fan to satisfy the call for second stage cooling before your first stage cooling is enabled. So go ahead and take that fan up to high speed for 5 minutes, and if it's still not working, then we could go ahead and go to mechanical cooling. That's what it's telling it. Okay, so that's our last option for advanced setup. Next thing we'll talk about is our set points. First up, we have our mixed air temperature set point. Default is 53 degrees. The reason why it's less than the standard supplier temperature of 55 is because you usually pick up a couple of degrees when it goes through the blower. Your low temperature lockout, this is the temperature at which mechanical cooling is completely shut off. If it's below this, you won't have any mechanical cooling. If it's above, you'll still have the option for mechanical cooling. This is your dry bulb limit, also known as your high limit changeover. So this is telling it at what temperature for the outside air your economizer will go back down to minimum position. Depending on your climate zone, this will change. So I'm going to go ahead and change this to 71, which is the requirement for my climate zone out here in West Covina. Okay. Now we have our enthalpy curve. So these enthalpy curves you can choose from ES1 all the way to ES5. I'll go ahead and show you what those look like. So these are your curves. We'll go ahead and choose ES3, which is a dry bulb temperature of 70 degrees and an enthalpy of 24. Okay. This is your DCV set point, basically telling it at what point the economizer should start modulating to maintain that set point. So we have it at 1100 ppm. The reason being outside air is usually around 400 ppm. Most code requires you to keep the DCV levels or the CO2 levels 700 ppm more than your outside air. So 1100 is a good set point. You could go ahead and change that if you wanted to. This is your minimum position. It is a 2 to 10 volt for the actuator. So it being at 2.8, it's actually 10% for its minimum position. And this is what you'll have if you have a 1-speed fan. If you have a 2-speed fan, you will not have this option. For the 2-speed fan, you'll have your vent max, which is your minimum position on the economizer. And then your vent min. So this is basically saying for the CO2 level that it's at, go ahead and modulate between your vent max and your vent min. Vent min is always lower than your vent max. So go ahead and lower that to 2.5 for the sake of this example. Okay, this is your ERV outside air temperature set point. You can set that to whatever you need for your ERV. Your exhaust 1 set point, this is if you just have a single stage for exhaust fan, basically telling it at 50%, go ahead and turn that on. You'll have to adjust it accordingly so that way the building pressure remains stable. And finally, if you have a 2-stage exhaust fan, this is where you would set the set point for that second stage of exhaust fan to go ahead and kick on. Okay, so that concludes our first section of the video, which talked about our system setup, our advanced setup, and our set points. We're going to go ahead on the next video and talk about our status, our checkout, and alarms. Thank you for watching this video. I look forward to teaching you again. Take care.